We now invite Jaron to come here and share with us his valuable experience.
Do you have a pointer for me, Anna? I'll figure out how this one works. Well, welcome and thank you, Anna, for organizing this and for inviting me to come over. This is, I think, the first time I've been at China CUHK to actually talk about case writing. I've done this at many other universities, typically spending a full day or 2 full days to talk about case writing and the case development process. So now I've tried to cram, a little bit of what I know in this short 45-minute talk. And I asked me to talk a little bit about why we write case studies. So we'll very briefly go over that. I go a little bit over what I think makes a good case. I go a little bit over the case development process itself. The key bottleneck, which CUHK just mentioned in his opening speech, how to incentivize faculty, and not that I haven't been able to crack successfully yet. It's really a difficult challenge. And then lastly, I was inspired by a talk I went to on Friday by Kathleen Eisenhardt about rules for complex situations. Now cases aren't that complex for me anymore, I guess, because I've been doing it for many years. I think I've developed over 300 case studies over all these years. First at Hong Kong U, where I was managing the Asia Case Research Center for 7 years. 2 years as a writer, 5 years as a manager, and now at Hong Kong U, Hong Kong UST, where I've been for 6 years, but almost. But I know for a lot of new people, cases can be somewhat complex, can be new, very different from typical academic writing. So I just put together, a few quick rules for case writing, case publishing, case planning, stuff like that. I hope we get to that. And then, when you have questions at any time, feel free to ask me the questions. I'm actually not sure if I need this mic. Is this okay? Or is it too...
I think mic is better.
Mic is better? Okay. I'll hold it. I'll practice my... my wife says I have to do more exercise anyway, so, I'll do that. Let's get started with why case studies. Let me... And what button to press, do you know? Okay, well, technical problems. That's why when I organize a case competition at Hong Kong U, we use overhead slides. And I think they still use it even after I left. Yeah, because there was such a time limit. And when you use PowerPoints at that time, there was always technical problems. And we couldn't even spare 5 minutes of the schedule. So we thought, okay, overhead slides works. Okay, why cases? I don't know if you recognize these 2 gentlemen. I think they've both been on money. That's not in circulation anymore. I mean, the top guy was on a $2 bill, and the gentleman here in the bottom is, Confucius. They said something that, for me, captures the essence of case writing, okay? Tell me and I forget, show me and I remember, involve me and I learn. And that is what case studies really are about, right? Case studies really are about students stepping into the shoes of a decision maker. Being able to close their eyes and thinking, okay, I am the decision maker, I am responsible for this in this situation. And, identifying an issue, coming up with solutions to that issue, analyzing the solutions, and then coming up with the recommendation. Now, like we are basically doing what Harvard started doing in 1910, I think, around that time when they first started doing case studies, Thomas Jefferson is basically doing what Confucius was saying a few thousand years before. He actually made that remark, the same thing. I think he just said it in English. But to me, this is the essence of case writing. So then, okay, so then what makes a popular case? To me, what is an effective case? I've been working on a lot of cases, and a lot of people think, popular cases, effective cases, they're probably the same thing. And I put 2 pictures here. This is, a very popular politician. This is a more effective politician, not very popular. You probably don't know who the guy in the bottom is. That's, the prime minister from my country, the Netherlands. He thinks he's very interesting. Okay, is there the thingy? Okay. Okay, here you go. I wasn't supposed to show that yet, but anyway, popular cases. So based on experience, a popular case. And when I talk about popular, I talk about a case that sells, that other people will buy from a case development platform. So what are the most popular cases? You know, and I've seen these sales numbers coming year over year over year. Most popular cases, most important, has to be a highly visible US company. 70% of the market for case studies is still North America. They like to, they like to read about companies they're familiar with. Then naturally, brand name is important. School, professor, okay? Shorter cases, that's a trend. Strategy marketing cases that can be used across discipline. Again, and the case has to have a teaching note. So if you want to write cases that will be picked up by other people, this is what you're supposed to write. And actually we did quite a lot of that when I was at Hong Kong U. We focused mostly on cases to be sold to other schools. Okay? But those are not necessarily the cases that are effective cases for use in the classroom. Our students are not that interested about US companies they've never heard about. They're not that interested about a case on General Motors. I mean, many of them have never even driven a car, or their parents don't own a car. They have no affinity with it. Our students like cases that are on local companies, companies they can see themselves work at in the future, companies that are relevant to them. Okay? They like cases that are developed by the faculty who are teaching the particular case. That really, really makes a difference. If you develop your own case and you teach it in the classroom, suddenly you are an expert, right? And that especially is true for academic faculty and more junior faculty, you know, who unlike adjunct faculty that have, you know, years and years of business experience and can speak from experience, junior faculty and academic faculty typically don't have that similar level of business credibility. And writing your own case really gives that to you. Also because when you write your own case, you know a lot more than is actually in the case study, than is available to the students in the end, you know? You're able to get the case protagonist into the classroom. You really turn yourself into an expert on that particular situation, on that particular company. You can share insights that aren't known to the students. Okay, cases should be short, yes, but they should be focused, in my opinion. I am not a big fan of, you know, the 30-page Harvard case studies that can be used across every discipline known to man. I like cases that are a little bit more focused, that can fit clean into a course outline. And to me, actually, this is the most important point almost. It fits perfectly into your course outline. The course outline is the start of your case study journey. You shouldn't start a case study by, okay, I read an article in the Financial Times, oh, this company sounds so interesting, let's write a case study on them. The best way to do a case study is look at your course outline. Okay, what am I teaching in week 1, week 2, week 3, week 4, week 5? I might have a good Harvard case for week 1, a good Harvard case for week 3. I still need something for week 2. Okay, what concepts and theories am I teaching in that particular week? Okay, and then, you know, find a case study, find a company that is facing a situation in which those particular concepts and theories can be applied. And then you have an effective case. Okay, and field cases, real people, real problems. Those are not the most popular cases. The most popular case is the Apple case. Those are often also not award-winning cases. I mean, you have different competitions. Certain competitions allow for all cases, you know, cases based on secondary information and cases based on field studies. And often the secondary case studies are preferred by the judges. And one of the reasons is that if you write a field case, let's say you write a strategy case, and for the case study at the end you have to go to the company and get them to sign off on the company. So the company won't be happy if you put a lot of information on their competitors in that particular case study, right? You cannot give a very detailed competitor breakdown, talk about all the products they do, because a lot of times the company will say, well, why don't you write so much about our competitors at other cases about us? So you have to remove that from the case study, and you might give them additional reading, or you ask them to figure it out by themselves through the questions you ask them. But since it's not in the case, other faculty will think, oh, there are pieces missing. It's not complete, so you won't get your award. So these are popular cases versus effective cases. I think you should always focus on writing these. I've done both. I've probably done more popular cases than I've done effective cases, because we were more productive when I was at Hong Kong U, and we focused more on, these highly visible US companies, writing cases on McDonald's in China, General Motors in China, stuff like that. But I think in terms of quality, in terms of what works in the classroom, this is better. Okay, it works. So how do we develop these cases at Hong Kong UST, right? This is our case development process. And I'm just going to run you through it step by step. If you have any questions, feel free to ask me. But like I said, concepts, theories are key. That's where your case should start, really. Very often the faculty come to me and, they say, okay, I'm looking for a case study. I go to them and say, okay, what case studies are you using in the classroom? Would you like to replace one of your existing case studies with a more local case study? Or maybe do you lack any particular case studies? Please send me a copy of your course outline. Or I ask the department for copies of all the course outlines, and I just approach the faculty myself. And then we identify the problem. And then we start thinking about, okay, what kinds of companies should we contact that are probably facing these issues? And then we start approaching companies as opposed to the other way around. After, identify companies, and this is basically how we do these things internally, right? We, as faculty, develop a case design. And this is basically a list of questions they're going to ask the students, a list of learning objectives for the case. Okay, what concepts, theories do you want the students to apply? What's the learning that you want to, achieve using the particular case study? This case study goes to us, we go over it, and typically it goes back and forth, a few times, and it goes to my boss, and he approves the funding, and then we make funding available for a case writer, because the business model we work with, and this is similar to what we did at Hong Kong U, is we actually employ case writers on a contractor basis to develop the cases under supervision of our faculty. Because if you look at the various parties involved in the case development process, companies, faculty, writers, case center, you can see them as one. The biggest bottleneck is actually faculty. Companies in Hong Kong aren't really that much of an issue. Getting companies to work with you is pretty straightforward, I find, in this region. I mean, people in Hong Kong, especially a lot of companies, are family owned. A lot of companies in Hong Kong, the founder is still there, or at least the family. And once people, Chinese people, Indian people, similar, reach a certain status within society, they want to give back to society. And the way Chinese people give back to society, education is the #1 way. So if you sell it as helping to educate the next generation of business leaders, contributing towards the improvement of education in Hong Kong, if you approach a company from that angle, they're typically happy to help, And in Hong Kong companies, you always have to approach them top down. Because as soon as the family, the boss says it's okay, everyone falls in line and it will be signed off at the end. The other way is a little bit more tricky. Okay, so you develop your case design. The case design is approved, allocation, and then we start identifying the company. See? So we only identify the company at this particular stage in the process. You can see I kind of marked Hong Kong USC faculty member and our center responsibility. I think 40% of the companies are identified by our faculty through their own networks, through their own, maybe their students or something like that. The rest is identified by us, or maybe through our alumni network, where I work with our alumni team, or even through some of our case writers who, have their own networks, typically have background in the particular industry they're writing on, and can put us in touch with relevant people. I also think, like CUHK mentioned, that this is actually a very important aspect of case writing, the bridging of the gap between academia and the local business community. I think there is a gap in Hong Kong, much wider gap than there is, for example, in North America. From what I know from institutions such as IMD, INSEAD, Harvard, they have much stronger connections, the faculty, with the business community than faculty have here in Hong Kong. And you actually notice that when you develop case studies, because unlike adjunct professors, when an adjunct professor goes into a company, when you go into the company, you typically do some reading, and you think you understand what their issues are. And adjunct professors are typically right. Academic professors are often wrong. I'm often wrong if I don't know the industry myself, right? So, I mean, for example, we went into 7-Eleven, we wanted to write a case study on their distribution center. So, and in particular, that faculty member was interested in the cold storage supply chain because he was doing some research on that particular topic, and 7-Eleven, actually, they have a lot of cold storage supply chain. And he thought they would be facing particular issues that, were written a lot about, especially in academia. And we sat down, and basically all of those things were non-issues to the company. It was not an issue at all. What really kept them awake was, finding labor in Hong Kong, something completely different. And you find that quite often when, with faculty, you actually go into companies, and the faculty learn as much, if not more, from working on the case than the students learn from, studying with it. So in that sense, that goes back to my earlier point that, you suddenly become an expert in front of the classroom. So I think in that sense, developing case studies as an academic is important because it kind of keeps you aware of what is actually happening within the business community. And I think in terms of your research, it's also important because relevance of research is, I guess, is becoming a bigger topic, right? So if you do more case studies, you will become more aware than, I think, the average academic faculty member of what is actually, what the real issues are that companies are facing. Okay, so we identify the company. We have a preliminary meeting with the company. In the preliminary meeting, we basically tell them, okay, this is a case study. They often don't really know what a case study is, right? And especially what a teaching case is, what a Harvard-style American teaching case is, what the students are expected to do. So we have a meeting with the company, we get background information about the issue, the culture. We sit down with them and tell them, okay, this is who I am, this is what I'm teaching. This is the level of students I'm teaching. Because you don't want to give them the wrong impression that this case is going to be for your CUHK EMBA students, while it's going to be used with your undergraduates, because they will be unhappy. So you have to be clear up front that this is going to be a case. I'm probably going to use it with my senior undergraduates and maybe with some of our MSc students, or this is going to be a case specifically for our executive MBA students. So you tell them that, and you tell them the particular topics you're interested in. These are the areas, these are the concepts I'm teaching. This is an area within your company I thought would be interesting, but could you tell me what are the issues your company is actually facing related to, the topics I'm teaching in the classroom? And I would say, 50% of the time, based on that first conversation, you have to go back to your case design and tweak it because the actual issues that the company is facing are somewhat different than what you had in mind. I mean, they still relate to the same concepts and theories, but the issues themselves are just fairly different. So you do your you have your preliminary meeting with your company. You have a good idea about the challenge they're facing, the general culture, stuff like that. You do your data gathering, and then I think this is very important. And I didn't do this when I was at Hong Kong U. I only really started doing it later on when I basically went to Hong Kong UST and redesigned the whole process. Was submit an outline of the case study to the company. And why do you do that? First of all, you don't want to raise wrong expectations with the company. If you give them an outline, basically a summary of the introduction of the case, and just chapter by chapter. Chapter 1, this is what's going to go into the case. Chapter 2, chapter 3, chapter 4, and these are the exhibits I need. The company knows what you need. So at that time, they can tell you, okay, half of this is not going to be made available to you. You can still step back, right, without wasting any more time. You can renegotiate with the company. You can say, okay, I cannot get this and this and this, but I'm able to disguise it. You also say to the company, well, if you approve it now, because you basically give it to them and ask them for comments and approval. If you approve it now, then naturally we expect you to sign off on a release on the final product also. And if you're working with a case writer, it makes the job for the case writer a lot easier also, because the case writer and the faculty agree on an outline, and the only thing the case writer then does has to complete the outline. And the chance of them going, far off what the professor's actual idea and target is are much reduced. And as a result, the amount of wasted time in the process is much reduced. So you have your outline, send it to the company, then you typically have another interview with the company where you go into the more specifics of the particular issue you're facing. You might talk to someone else in the company that is more dealing with that particular issue as opposed to the first meeting. The first meeting, typically, you want to go as senior as you can. It's always easier within these companies to start at the top and move down. Okay, then you write your draft, review the draft, revise draft, final draft. From my experience, because I review a lot of drafts, typically you need about 3 revisions before a case is I think ready to be sent to a copy editor and copy edit and publish. If you don't have additional pairs of eyes to look at it, if you don't have a case writer that has worked in the industry, I think that is the optimal kind of combination, a faculty member, a case writer that is well educated and has relevant industry experience. Give this case study to some of your colleagues. Get other people to look at it. I mean, the best articles that are published are peer-reviewed for a reason too, right? I mean, if you just write your case in isolation, it won't be as good as you think it is. There's always room for improvement. So don't hesitate to share what you've written with others and ask them for honest feedback. So you go to a series of drafts typically. Then you obtain a company release, which is again very important. Make sure you get a company to sign off and give you full rights to that particular case study, not just in an email, actual piece of paper, company stamp on it, or an autograph, someone from within the company that has authorization to sign off on these things. And work with a legal department or whatever you have within the university to make sure that release covers basically everything you want to do with it. You want to translate it, you want to put it in a case book, you want to give other universities a license to use that particular case, maybe even sell that license to other universities, because this is your only chance. Once you get that piece of paper signed off, you cannot go back to them 2 years later and say, okay, I actually want a little bit more rights, right? And you have your case, and eventually you want to publish it, or maybe you're doing a textbook and you want your case in a textbook, or someone hears about your case and they want to use your case. If you don't have that release, that can happen. And publishers are pretty picky on these releases. What you then do, and you test your case in the classroom, right? You use it in the classroom, and often you find that what is obvious to you isn't obvious to the students at all. You write it in a particular way, and it goes for myself, the case writer, the faculty members. Often we want to push the students in a certain direction, right? We think, okay, they will be able to pick up on this, they will be able to pick up on this, put one and one together and get two, right? And they don't sometimes, they miss certain pieces. They focus on areas that are not really important and move away from the areas you want them to focus on. So that means sometimes you have to tweak the case a little bit after your first shoots. And those are not major tweaks. Honestly, they're just little tricks to highlight certain areas, bring them out a little bit better. Downplay other areas of the case. Maybe tweak your questioning in the classroom to focus them on particular areas of the case a little bit better. So you test your case, you modify it, and then, only then, I suggest to develop the teaching note. I mean, some faculty like to develop a teaching note before they teach the case, but in my opinion, and I'm not an academic, but in my opinion, the best teaching notes are those written based on classroom experience. To me, the most useful teaching note is some teaching note that shows another professor, I use this case in the classroom, this is how students react, this is how you can walk them to the various issues in the case. This is going to be my opening question. And I'm sure Terence will talk about that a lot more later on, so I will leave it with that. And then you go to copy editing and publication, which I understand Kevin will talk about later on. So I'm not going to, talk much more about that. I'll leave it at this. And if you have questions at any time, feel free. Yes, Ken?
How do you avoid force-fitting your materials to your beginning concepts and theories?
Force? Let me. I'm not 100% sure if I understand it.
Sometimes it's very easy to force-fit your materials into the theories and the concept or frameworks that you use in the beginning, right? When you design the case. You think this case is on marketing,
yes.
brand loyalty or whatever. But as you went into the company and you find materials contradictory to what you're finding, to your theory, right? And how do you avoid force feeding that? Because you wouldn't want actually knowing the company so well, right? And you can pick and choose. If you're not very careful, you may be dishonest.
Okay, I see what you're saying. You're basically saying you're tweaking the truth so it fits your means somehow, somewhat. Actually, when I write cases, that isn't really an issue. Maybe I'm doing it anyway, but I don't really feel that is much enough an issue. Also because you are working hand in hand with the company, and they do go over the case. And sometimes with a fine-tooth comb, right? They really go over it and they give you feedback. And if the case is not in line with the actual situation, they actually might not be happy with you. So I think we always try to reflect the company as honestly as possible. That being said, the company likes to make itself seem great, what it does seem fantastic, fabulous. If you write a case, it has to be written in a very neutral tone. So that is something, that's always something that some companies specifically, they just come back and add all these adjectives to the case, our great plans, our fantastic ideas, our amazing team. And you get back to them and say, well, we cannot do that. It has to be neutral. Students should be able to figure out that you are amazing, based on the things you did, as opposed to just telling the students, okay, you guys are fantastic, But that particular issue you mentioned of force feeding them, I don't think it's really an issue with case development that much. No. Okay, so you looked at the previous slide and you see we've tried many different things to make the process actually as easy as possible to the faculty. You know, we guide them through the process, we help them with the case plan, we help them with the case design. We have case writers that are trained, experienced in terms of industry experience, and often also are good writers to help them throughout the process. Then on the first slide we saw that, you know, cases are good, and we've done some research within Hong Kong UST. One of my colleagues, Professor Winnie Peng, did some research many years ago and found a very strong correlation within our school between our teaching assessment scores of our faculty and their use of cases. Strong correlation. So they're basically saying if you use cases, you get better teaching scores. You know, then we get a lot of our students, on those faculty that use cases, a lot of our students as feedback if we, I like cases, but I want more recent cases. I want more Asian cases. I want things that are more relevant. Or they use one of their own cases and the students write back, you know, please more of that. And actually, if I work with faculty, and you know, I've worked with many faculty over the years, getting them to do their first case is the biggest challenge. Once, you know, I have them hooked, they basically keep writing it because they realize that, you know, it really adds value to their teaching, to everything basically they do in their careers at the university. But still, you know, even though we're doing all these different things, and I think at Hong Kong UST we have quite a good framework set up, it's tough to get faculty to work with me. We have over 140 faculty at Hong Kong UST, and I've worked with close to 40 of them, which is a decent number, but you know, if it was up to me, I would work with many more. Now, why doesn't it work? Basically, like Carl mentioned, a lot of the research faculty are not that interested in doing cases. They see the value, but why should I do my own? I can just grab from Harvard. I don't have time. It doesn't count towards tenure. It's not recognized by the university leadership. So there's a lot of different issues, right? So within our school, we have these issues, the same issues at Hong Kong U. I mean, most schools, with the exemption of a very few schools, Ivy, you know, Harvard, there's a fair few schools where cases are, you know, part of the culture. If the cases are not part of the culture, getting faculty to write cases is hard. So I called all my colleagues at, you know, at Asia, I spoke to my colleagues in North America. I think I called about, you know, 10, 12 people in case development centers across, you know, various universities. And these schools are already quite well developed because, you know, like me, I have colleagues there that have a similar job as me, basically help to, you know, help the faculty develop case studies. So there's basically two types of approaches that schools use. The carrot and stick approach, so to speak, right? Money. Some schools give faculty money, decent amounts of money even. I mean, think about the equivalent of $3,000 to $5,000 for, you know, a school if they supervise a case study. They don't have to write it themselves, right? It's written by the case writer. But if they supervise a case study, they get, you know, anywhere between $3,000 to $5,000. This doesn't work. I spoke to those schools. I mean, some of them did it in the past, you know, and stopped doing it. Some are still doing it because, you know, the faculty that are writing cases don't want the program to stop, the program to stop, and they feel that, you know, we find some faculty that work with us, we want to reward them, and the money is here, why not give it to them, right? But in terms of, you know, pulling faculty across that lines, getting them to go from I'm not interested to okay, I want to work with you, it doesn't work. Maybe in India it works, but it doesn't work in, you know, any kind of more prosperous economy. Then recognition. You know, you write your case, you get recognized for doing so. Recognition by students. That is an incentive that works for faculty that are doing it. Once the student feedback comes in, once they see their teaching scores improve, once they get, positive feedback from their students. Am I out of time?
Sorry, my series responding to.
Okay, I don't have a clock, so I told you I wasn't sure. I just put it together yesterday, condensed it into 45 minutes. So students, that works for faculty that are already doing cases. That keeps them motivated. It also doesn't really help pull people across the line. Peers, again, same thing. I have faculty at Hong Kong U. They say whenever I go to an academic conference, give my business card. And this was a faculty that did a lot of cases on real options. There's very few cases on real options, so everyone that taught real options basically used his cases. And whenever he gave his business card, the faculty would say, I'm using your case. And not, oh, I've read your paper, your academic journal paper. No, nothing else. I read your case, I'm using your case. It's such a great case. So that kept him motivated, that his colleagues at reputable institutions were using his case study. But again, it only works if you already are doing cases. That basically keeps people that are doing cases motivated. Recognition from the school. That is one thing that works. Okay? But basically the school says, okay, if you do cases, you have to do less service. You don't have to sit in that many committees. The time that you spend on cases can be deducted from the time you have to do service. That works very well. It just getting your school to do that is a challenge. I mean, I would love for Hong Kong UST, Hong Kong U in the past, I'm sure any school in Hong Kong or overseas would love that the school actually recognizes the contribution that faculty make towards, case studies, teaching cases. Because I think often faculty, they're so stuck in their academic research, and that's my perspective as a case center manager, right? I mean, I'm a big supporter of case studies. But if you get into a taxi and you say, I'm a professor, what does the taxi driver say? What was your latest paper about? He asks you, what do you teach? Right? So I think recognition is important, but that it's hard because it has to be top down. And how about the stick approach? It's actually typically this is a lot more effective, the stick approach. Culture, peer pressure. At a school like Ivy, you write cases because Ivy professors are expected to write cases. Everyone always writes cases. If you're at Ivy, you better write cases. If you're at Harvard, you better develop case studies, right? Then required for 10-year promotion. There are certain schools in Asia that are doing this now. In China, there are some where, if you want to be promoted from assistant to associate, you have to do so many cases. If you then want to be promoted from associate to full professor, you have to do so many cases again. And that really works. I mean, then everyone starts doing cases suddenly, right? Because otherwise you won't get your promotion. There's very few schools that actually do that.
Who's doing that?
I'm not gonna name the names but it's a top 5 school in China. So that you can 20% chance you'll pick the right one. Contract. Again, this is being done now again in China by certain very good schools. It's part of their contract. You sign a contract, you have to write case studies. It's in the contract that the faculty sign with the school. Works very well too. I mean, you want to get your pay, you keep working here, you better develop some cases. Then, instead of making basically the law of tenure of contract, senior management pressure, top down. In Singapore, this is used quite extensively, where there's various schools there that have various modes of top-down pressure, where the dean basically organizes events like this. And then he basically goes to department heads and says, you have to send at least 3 people from your department to this. He twists their arm, you better send 3 faculty. And if you attend, you have to do a case. That works. It's not my preferred method of doing it, but it works. And then basically making it a requirement of teaching. And that is done by some US schools. In US schools, because cases are not only a teaching tool, they're also a branding tool. The Harvard brand is case studies. So imagine you go to Stanford, you go to Columbia, and you pay for an executive education program, which is very expensive. As much as the executive education program at Harvard. And you sit down as a student, you pay hundreds of thousands of dollars. All the materials have the Harvard logo on it. Right? And what do you say? Oh, why don't I go to Harvard directly? So what did certain deans do? They say, if you want to teach in our executive MBA, if you want to teach our MBA, 50% of the core curriculum has to be Columbia cases, has to be Stanford cases, has to be whatever, So, and a lot of faculty is a nice bit of their income teaching in executive and MBA education, so they don't want to give that up, so they have to develop cases. That works extremely well too. So this is basically the carrot and the stick approach. It's a little bit sad to say that only this one really works in terms of carrots. The sticks are a lot more effective. Okay, so I'm getting close to the end of my presentation. Quick rules. Like I said, I put together some quick rules for people that haven't really written many cases before, developed many cases before. Rules I myself, over all these years of experience, found that typically work. And I'm not here to say that these rules are set in stone, but I'm just here to say if you're a beginning faculty, you've not really written many cases before, sticking to these rules typically will improve the quality of your output. Once you have some experience under your belt, you can start making your own rules. You can start trying out new things, doing MOOCs, doing HTML cases, doing comic books in case format. There's a lot of stuff going on, right? But I think when you do a traditional case for the first time, these rules might be helpful. So, in terms of case topic, basically the concept trumps the company. The concept should really come first, It's more important, and that's not if you want to sell a lot of cases, that's if you want to write an effective case that is good in a classroom. If you want to sell a lot of cases, if you want other faculty to use it, well, write another case in Apple. But if you want to be effective in a classroom, this is first. Field versus secondary. Always try doing a field case first. It's so much more impactful also for you as a faculty member to do a field case and get all that learning out of it. For the students, Harvard claims, and I've not been to Harvard, so I'm not sure, but Harvard claims that in 50% of their classes, they have a company protagonist in a classroom. That's a very high number. Actually, the cases we are doing at Hong Kong UST, we probably reach that same figure. We get a lot of people into the classroom based on the cases we do. Not only that, those companies, they come to me, Jeroen, how can I get in touch with your school? Because I want to recruit more of your students. Now, a lot of these companies, they have no idea how to engage with the academic community. They're interested in engaging. They want to recruit as students, do exec ed, they might even be interested in doing certain research. They just don't have a way in. So if you are to start doing cases, you will sometimes be approached for these types of things also. So field. Now, that's not being said secondary cases have no value. I do secondary cases too, but not if I can do a field case on the same topic. I do a secondary case, if there's no, certain topics, they're very broadly reported on. For example, food scandals in China, or the toy with the lead paint, or the milk, Sanlu milk. Topics like this, where Sanlu is not going to talk to you about, the issues they had with their milk, but it's been reported so widely that you can typically write a decent case on it. Certain cases in the area of economics, where it's not necessarily company, minimum wage, or should we raise the minimum taxi fare in Hong Kong, right? I mean, you might talk to some people, but for the case itself, you don't really need a company and a company protagonist. So you might just talk to some alumni that work in relevant departments and in government, or maybe someone, you talk to some taxi drivers when you're taking a long trip from Hong Kong UST to China shoot. But you don't need to write a field case on topics like that. But anything you can write a field case on, do it like that. Local versus overseas. You write local cases. Cases that are situated here in the region, right? That are directly relevant to your students. Cases on companies that your students want to work at, might work at in the future. Write cases like that. Try to avoid writing cases, on big name US companies, even if they're in China. I mean, sometimes it's interesting to do, and I do them myself. But try to still give it this kind of a local angle, local protagonist, etc., etc. Okay, so then my 3 little rules for the development process. You always have to list your questions and learning objectives at the start of the process. It focuses your thoughts, it orders your thoughts. It really helps also if you're working with a case writer, because they know what you want out of the case. This is the cleanest way of letting another person know what you are expect to do with a particular case study. And as a case writer, what information has to go in the case study to make this happen? This is really, where the case study starts. Develop your outline and get it approved. I talked a little bit about this earlier. I mean, I feel quite strongly about it. I think it really does help. And, it helps with expectation management a lot. It helps you with getting your eventual case release. It helps you in avoiding any miscommunication between you and the company and you and the case writer. And basically, the more people look at your case and comment on it, the better it gets. So don't be afraid to share it with people, right? Okay, then the writing itself, and I'm sure friends will talk a lot about this. We write cases in the past tense. Don't forget, and people will always do. Case writers always do. Why do we write in the past tense? There's a lot of argument. I'm not a linguist, so Harvard basically started doing it. It's the style in which cases are written. I mean, one person explained it to me, a linguist, because I've had a lot of these discussions, and there's linguists that are very strongly for it and very strongly against it, and anywhere in between. And one person told me, you have to see a case as a fairy tale. There once was a dragon that lived in a city that was called New York. And why does a fairy tale write like that? Because it allows the reader to think they are that princess, to step into the shoes of that particular protagonist. And moreover, cases have quite a long shelf life. I mean, a strategy case might have a shelf life of anywhere between 3 to 5 years, marketing case too. Other cases in risk, operations management might have a shelf life of as much as 10, 12 years. If you write a case in the present tense and you use it 10 years from now, it will seem very much more outdated than if you read it in the past tense. So it really helps you extend the shelf life of your case study. Okay, no repetition. So the order of information matters. You know, people like to repeat themselves, order information. You go from the generic to the specific. And within each individual, chapter, and you can use a lot of little sub-chapters, and at each individual chapter, you put all the information in chronological order. The moment you do that, you start repeating yourself, and the case basically becomes unclear at points. And your opinion doesn't matter. You cannot put your own opinion in a case study. You can put opinion of industry leaders, other people, put it in the words of the particular protagonist, and let the student form their own opinion based on the facts you provide them. Don't draw conclusions for the students, basically. Also, academic theory typically does no place in a case. You can provide handouts with academic theory. What you can do, and sometimes I do that when the theory is a little bit esoteric or there's not, it's not basic information you find in any textbook. I put handouts as appendices in the teaching note. And then the faculty can just choose, okay, I wanna give him some information on how to do value at risk calculations or something like that, right? 2-page. And it's in the teaching notes, the faculty can choose to use it or not. And don't make it part of the case study. Okay, and this is the 3 things you should never do. Don't use copyrighted materials, because if you do, you can never get your case published in a journal, in a book, in anything. Copyrighted materials, it's very broad. In this PowerPoint, I used a lot of copyrighted materials. Okay, all these pictures, I didn't get permission to use them. In a case, I can never do that. I have to clear the rights of everything, or reproduce it in my own way. If I see this nice table by McKinsey, McKinsey is so smart, they never put any numbers in their tables. They just put these nice graphs. So then I get my ruler and basically reproduce it. I cannot just copy the graph and paste it in my case study. You can reproduce a lot of that stuff as long as it falls under fair use, so you don't take base 50% of your case study in someone else's work. So, but a chart here, a table there, reproduce them. Don't copy paste them. And don't fail to get a release for your case study, because again, then you're officially not allowed to use it, even in your own classroom. That's it. Any questions? I hope I stuck within the 45 minutes.
We may have one.
Yes.
I wrote a case before because the protagonist, the CEO of a company, stepped down and finally I could not get a case release. At that time, I thought I might just ignore the company, ignore the CEO, I have academic freedom to submit a case. What would be your advice?
No, my advice would be not to do that. I mean, that's the different way. I understand your problem. And the problem actually is a lot more common if you write about non-local companies. Because what happens is, you talk to the head of Asia Pacific, and you do your case, and the development process can take a bit of time, and the moment it's ready, you're ready to sign off the case, that the head of Asia Pacific is back or is with another company, and his replacement is unwilling to sign your case study. Happens quite a lot. If you do it with local companies, the risk is actually much lower, especially if you go through the family, right? Because they will be there forever. So, but getting back to your issue, okay, the company says, I don't want to sign because the CEO is gone. Typically, we wouldn't use it because we don't want to damage our relationship and our reputation with that particular company that typically also employs our students, might contribute to the school in other ways. But I would go back to them and basically suggest them, okay, how about I disguise this case? I change the company name, change the name of the CEO. It makes the case weaker, but you still have, I think, a product that you might be able to to use. I mean, I would also weaken the release. I would get a release just for Chinese U to begin with. If even they don't allow that, I would get a release only for myself. You know, typically my release allows any and all use. That is the release I like to give companies. So I can use it any way as she fit. And actually the legal department sometimes get back to me to limit it to educational use only, or only Hong Kong USC. That I strongly am against using it only within my own school. So I argue very heavily on that. I prefer to disguise it instead of using it only in my own school. But yes, sometimes that happens. And often, like you say, because changes in leadership.
What if you have a problem with access, but you have only access to public information, right? You write a case based on public information.
If you write a case based on public information, and you probably cite everything you put in the case study, you can publish it without any release. Just cite it everywhere. And then actually we had an interesting problem at Hong Kong U one time, where we wrote a case on the Korean Shabu, I think it's called. I mean, the big conglomerates in Korea, right? And it was written by this American professor. And as part of the case, we gave a little bit of history of the Shabu, and actually it goes back to the Kairetsu, the Japanese and the Japanese occupation of Korea. So the case actually said that, I think a short sentence about the Japanese occupation of Korea and how the basically brutal occupation of Korea, something like that, okay? So a Japanese student read that and was very angry, so he went to the Japanese consulate, so we got an official complaint from the Japanese consulate. But it was a secondary case, and the professor said, yeah, I mean, this is part of history, I mean, you live with it, you know? So, yeah, if it's a secondary case, just cite your sources. Because the thing is, you publish it with an outside partner. Let's say you publish it through Ivy, Harvard, whatever, right? They make you sign a contract that if they get sued, you pay the legal cost. So you don't want to get sued, basically. You don't want your partners, your distribution partners, to get into trouble. So you don't want to, you want to be able to defend yourself if the company gets upset. And so you want to properly cite all your sources.
I think because of the time constraint, then we may actually chat more during the break time and talk to Jared. Right, we now go to break time. We will revert back here at 10:40 then. Okay, right. Some of the snacks and tea, drinks over there. Thank you.